what I'm gonna take you guys through is exactly what you just showed as a concept. That's what we did in reality with a retailer. So it's a food retailer, by the way. So the agenda will look like, hey, I'm not a digital business. There are still many businesses out there. They spend usually a lot of money on marketing. And what does that bring them? And for this use case, we have a client of ours that said, okay, I've been experimenting with digital marketing, and how do I do a digital transformation? How do I kick this off? How do I get my use case and my foundation, make the case and the foundation. So this is what I'm gonna take you through, and you'll be surprised that there are still, and this is purely Dutch, but internationally as well, a lot of non-digital business. And of course you get the questions like, hey, Zara, isn't that a digital business? No, really it isn't, and same goes for CNA. The same goes for McDonald's, KFC, and Burger King, but also like the train companies and the public transport. There are many non-digital businesses. And the reason why I'm saying that is that most of the transactions in the customer journeys take place actually for most of their revenue in the brick and mortar stores, where we have pretty different rules on what you can do and how you can collect data. So that's a bit of a challenge for most of these companies, although many of them also have an online business. Of course, you can order online at H&M and at CNA and Zara and the Bijenkorf, but some of them don't even have that. You cannot order anything online at Action or at Aldi or at Spar, maybe Spar for that matter. Right? So I worked with some of these businesses, and I'm going to take you through a food retailer. They didn't allow me to reveal the details of their name, and so the numbers have been changed a little bit, and I still have to be a little bit silent on the brand name, but it doesn't make a big difference for the use case I'm going to present. So for food retail, marketing seems like a very interesting thing, and many retailers spend a lot of money, on marketing. So if you look at companies like Jumbo and Albert Heijn, the big ones in the Netherlands, they spend more than 100 million a year on marketing, of course, with marketing objectives. And there's some digital marketing happening as well. But for most food retailers, marketing is not really contributing to the sales. It's what's actually driving their sales is proximity. The catchment areas. Here you see an example of how to select the right catchment areas for your supermarkets. That these are whole projects on itself, so I'm not going to dive deep in that. Then there's nothing for a long time, and then your pricing promotions, your pricing perception, your products and your assortment, they play a very big role as well. And in the end, media and advertising, the things that you do on radio, TV, leaflets, one-on-one digital apps, they play a very small role in the whole driving of the business. But it's not always as it seems. So my client in this case was actually in the early stages of spending a lot of money on media and advertising. They have plenty of proximity, by the way, but they were starting to spend more and more money, but they had no idea where that money was working. And of course, you have to start, as Mark Ritson said, you have to start with your objectives, before you can do anything, answering the questions whether your marketing spend is doing the things that you want. They were not spending a lot of money on digital, by the way, so we proposed to them to do a marketing mix approach. That's looking at all your business drivers. I have a nice graph for that, in a kind of a data-driven way, collecting as many data as you can on the marketing money that you spend, what your competition is doing, the economy, so controllable and non-controllable. Also, if you open new stores, your opening hours, COVID for one thing, for example, paid, owned, and earned media. So anything you can get your hands on in terms of data, we use then to model, because that's what we do with marketing mix modeling, to model the effects of what's happening there, the effects of your spend, the effects of your competition, the effects of your new store openings. And you can model that towards brand and awareness, or even towards sales. And actually for this client, we modeled towards sales. Now, for those who are new to marketing mix modeling, I think it's an age-old concept. I think it's 30 years old or maybe even older. But nowadays we have so much more data, and it works like this. And if you have a good look at this graph, you probably see let's say these are my sales, that's the line, and the bars are actually my GRPs, or the money I spent on marketing. It's just a very simplified example. So the money I spent on TV and radio, for example, we express that in GRPs, growth rating points. And if you look at this, yeah, you see some cause and effect, but it's very hard to understand all the peaks and valleys if you don't have the details. As a next step, I can reveal some of the details. We were spending money on food, on fresh food, we're spending money on non-food categories, and then you already start to see a little bit more, but it's still very hard to grasp. I mean, an average CMO would not understand what his money or her money is doing here. But if you then break it out in the three different levels of spend and the three different levels of sales, you actually see a very nice pattern. Well, this is more or less the essence of what marketing mix will do for you based on data and based on modeling. So it's a very simple approach. I can speak for hours about that. Typically, it looks very technically like the models are written in R or in Python, but they are usually very powerful in explaining what happened and why it happened. And not only for marketing, but also for COVID and competition and all the other things. Usually, typically, when I work with clients on this model, it's like 95 to 98% accurate. And you see that in the lower part of the picture, where we have series 1 is the actual sales and series 2 is the predicted sales. Well, this is only a start, and this is a bit of the technical approach behind it, but it typically delivers me, it tells me whether the money I spend on TV or radio or Facebook or one-on-one marketing or in emails, if that's generating any incremental sales. Incrementality is the key word, by the way, because most retailers, they generate sales anyway. Even if they don't do any marketing, people go to the retailer and buy their shopping, their food and their groceries. So because you need to go there every week to buy your toilet paper and your meat and your groceries. Anyway, spending that money on TV, radio, etc., is actually driving some of the incremental sales. And this is just an example of what you typically get. You get way more insights. But once you see that you spend, let's say, 5 million on TV and it drives something like 50 million in sales, then your ROI is positive. And sales is, of course, not the holy thing. You also have to look at your profit margin, because spending 5 million on TV and 50 million on sales looks very good, but if your margin is only 5% on your sales, then you're still wasting money. So once you have these kinds of insights, you can also say, hey, I want to change my marketing mix a little bit to spend it where it brings me most. And that's actually what I illustrate with the next picture, just to give you an overview of very simple things that we can do once we have been working into marketing mix. In this case, I show you two response curves. TV, if I spend money on TV, I get more sales. If I spend more money on TV, I get even more sales. But at a certain stage, it doesn't help me to spend even more money on TV. In this case, Facebook is a little bit more responsive. And the whole trick here is that I spend a little bit less money on TV. So I move, let's say, 500,000 from here. Oops, sorry, that was too quick. Back to here, and I use that 500,000 to spend on Facebook, and also reach some additional shoppers, and they come spend in my store. And that brings me actually, with the same budget, a sales result of more than 5 million. And I haven't spent a penny extra. Well, if you do that in a very artificial intelligence way, you can also have the whole thing optimized by the models. So that's what we typically do. But that's what Ritson also said. It's not about the quantitative, it's also about the qualitative. And many clients get a lot of insights and do a lot more with that. Well, for our clients, that we started off with a business case. And we said, well, you're spending like 30-40 million on marketing at the moment in different channels. And well, you have, let's say, a 3 billion revenue in your market. So we expect actually once you optimize and you get a better insight in how that money is working for you, we expect that you can improve some 20 to 30%, especially also because it was the first time they ever looked at it like this. And then typically you're overspending in some areas and underspending in some other areas. So there was a P&L opportunity of 4 to 5 million based on our experience with other retailers. And the whole cost for a project like this is something like about 100,000 euros. So that's a very good ROI on your project investment, as you can see. I'll share some of the actual results with you. There was, let's say, workshops of many different workshops actually, but one of the main things that the retailer found out was that actually, the base sales that's happening anyway was around 70% of their total sales. So people coming to the store for their daily shopping, and they were able to influence to create extra sales on top of that base sales, the things that are happening anyway without marketing or without promotions, something like 30% more or less. By what they were doing. And as you can see here, their marketing, their TV advertising, their radio advertising, and their even their online advertising was actually only adding something like 4% to the base sales. So that seems like not a lot, but if you're talking about 3 billion total revenue, 4% of 3 billion is still a significant amount. And if you then spend only 30 million on driving that sales, you can imagine that there's still a very positive return. So for each of the 1,000 euro they spent on advertising, the short-term effect in the P&L was 950. So in total, it brought like in the P&L 1950. But you have to subtract your spend to see what's left. So I would say to this client, you can for sure spend a little bit extra, because it's still driving your P&L in a positive manner. But the other thing they also found out was that they are not so heavy in promotions, but their promotions were still driving around 25% of the total sales, which was a big surprise to them, because they had something like 10-15% turnover in promotions, but the promotions were also driving extra items in the baskets. So that was one of the key insights that we had for this client. There were many more, but that's a good starting point. We also tried to dive a little bit deeper, and I won't bother you with all the numbers. These are the actual numbers that we got from them. So they were spending like 10 million on TV, and they had an uplift in the P&L of 16 million. So 65% of ROI. Radio was way more effective, because radio is a lot cheaper. They did a little bit on out of home and print, a little bit on digital, but not enough to make it visible. So there are also limitations to what you can measure with not enough data. But it was already very helpful for this client to start diving a little bit deeper. So we did also measure things that were driving sales year on year, and their online presence, which you can see here, circled here. And that online presence meant in this case, having a digital app, having a digital leaflet. In the Netherlands, we work a lot with leaflets, things that they throw through your mailbox, but now we have the digital leaflet as well. They were just starting to experiment there, and that was already driving 1.3% of their sales, almost as effective as their radio advertising. So that was actually a trigger for the next step with this client. Another interesting thing, actually, by the way, was COVID helped their sales a lot. So we said, okay, what's the year-on-year effects? As you can see here, COVID was actually driving more sales, which is, well, I think a well-known effect for food retailers, because we don't go to restaurants anymore. We cook at home a little bit better, a bit nicer. But at the same time, we also saw that their base sales was actually declining, like with 94 million a year, which is actually a very alarming sign, because that means probably that you get less shoppers, less people buying in your stores, so less sales happening automatically. And so we had to combine actually some of the insights to work on let's say business improvements, and one of the improvements that we saw was actually working a little bit more on the one-to-one marketing, because that showed a lot of potential, but they still didn't have a lot of data there. They don't have a bonus card. Most of the shopping happens in store. They use a leaflet, by the way, like most retailers in the Netherlands. But yeah, the leaflet is actually being cut down, because you need to opt in the Netherlands. It's not enough to opt out anymore in some cities. So you lose also that mechanism. But they were at a very early stage, very immature stage in the digital world. And why that's so important? Because they were losing shoppers. That was our hypothesis. And it's so important because shoppers are actually the biggest long-term driver of your business. So this is a typical picture I can use for any retail, but also for an automotive or for a financial or for a telco. Your sales typically, is built up out of your different categories. In this case, it's non-food, fresh food, food. But your food sales is typically actually built up from the number of shoppers that buy that food times the average sales per shopper. And as you can imagine, the average sales per shopper is your average basket size times the number of shopping trips in a year. But these two blue boxes, you cannot influence that much. There's a limit to it. Whilst this one is typically, especially in the Dutch food landscape, is where you have a lot of potential. And a new shopper, you all have heard about customer lifetime value. A new shopper typically brings a lot more than getting a bigger basket from your existing shopper. So we had to build a business case for one-to-one marketing, and there's a lot of numbers here. But as Maciek said, you have to start with making the case, and the thing that we wanted to do is find around 60,000 new shoppers per year through one-on-one marketing. Also because one-on-one marketing was already, even with the very basic approach that the client had, was already generating a lot of additional revenue and profit. Also using a one-to-one marketing, we were hoping for some loyalty effects, because you can be a little bit more precise in what you market towards your digital customers, and also maybe because we would have let's say personalized promotions, some promotion effects. So we made a kind of a business case on not too high business objectives, not too ambitious, just to get started, and to get people enthusiastic on investing more. But the business case already showed that even with these low objectives, we would be able to generate a P&L effect of around 4 million with a simple approach, actually, with a simple minimal viable products. If you translate that to ROI, marketing ROI, if you exclude the one-time setup, we would be having ROIs like over the hundreds, so which actually doesn't compare to the ones that we saw, like 65% for TV and in the previous slide. So the finance department was super happy with this business case, and they validated it. And then we started working with the client. They were actually digitally not that advanced, so we had to explain to them how does a digital strategy work, and we had a couple of workshops with them. I will share some of the results of this workshop. Of course, if you go into one-to-one marketing, you have to send the right message to the right person at the right time, the right channel, which also may include the non-digital channels, and then you get your engagement going. The first step that we had to overcome was that typically food retailers are usually thinking in shopper segments, but that's a totally different thing than a persona. So we went through a whole session on let's say modeling personas with them, and that was a very fun thing to do. And the really fun part, this is an example of one of the workshops. It's a bit in Dutch, but I think you will understand. The really fun part is that in this, let's say, persona and customer journey, we were able to mix both digital and online components with in-store components, with some ideas. It was just the first exercise. And of course, we need to do a lot more. But there was a good mix of digital and non-digital elements in the customer journey. There was also a huge lack of data. Customers go into the store, they buy something, and they go out. We don't know who the customer is. We only have the shopping basket, but it doesn't say anything about the family or the age or the persona in general. So we also attended this client. We showed them some examples of what an app can do. And many of the retailers in the Netherlands have apps, but this is just an example of what the app are tracking. And what you see here is one app that McDonald's is having in the Netherlands. What data are they using to track me? What data are they using to link me to other, let's say, data points? Got one for Albert Heijn there, one for Lidl, and one for Jumbo. And as you can see, many of these retailers are more advanced in tracking data from their app users. So our client was actually not doing anything in this area. So there was a huge potential there of getting data through their already existing app. They also want to improve the app a little bit. Just as an example, where do you get your data? There are 50 more examples where we need to get data, but this was the first start to also open their eyes a little bit. And then, of course, it's not like a one-day thing that you're going to do here. So we help them sketch a bit of a roadmap where we have, and at the top, the CRM execution. What do we want to do? We want to have let's say, personalized emails, personalized web page. Also, they have a call center where we want to be able to personalize the answers. Maybe also have a loyalty card, and then go into personalized coupons or personalized promo offers. Prevent churn, etc. These were some of the business use cases. And then, of course, you have to do your people, process, data, and tools and technology as well. To be honest, we are still in the very early stage here, in the 2021 stage. And one of the things that we are kicking off this autumn is actually a kind of a mini project where we have something like 3 months to get started. I won't bother you with all the details, and then have a kind of a minimal viable product in the first quarter actually of first half of 2022, just to get the client started, and then based on that experience and the learnings, finalize the roadmap and evolve. So that's the real life use case. Very interesting thing. Digital and non-digital mixed. Also, how do you start if you're not that digital? And the key takeaways are actually that it was good for the client to understand the whole marketing and marketing mix environment, so including non-media elements, in order to know where to dive deep. That also triggered the digital marketing actually, because that was already working a little bit. But it won't stop them advertising on TV and newspapers and leaflets, of course. For retailers and for many other players, B2C penetration, keeping clients, getting them on board and keeping them on board is typically the biggest sustainable growth driver. And that goes for both digital and brick and mortar businesses. And for this retailer, and also probably for many of the other food retailers, digital one-on-one marketing is a very promising instrument to drive shopper penetration and get shoppers to your store. Also because lots of, let's say, younger generations are not going into the paper leaflets anymore, and they just want to they watch their phones all day. It's a very simple thing. It's always good to start by making a business case, and really calculating potential revenues and profits and return on investments of the business case, because that gets the organization committed to doing that. The marketing budget for 2022 now has $1.5 million for one-on-one marketing. That wasn't there before. And having a foundational start, as Maciek also showed us, is always a part of your digital strategy and roadmap. So you don't know everything yet. So you start simple, learn, and then adjust your roadmap. So that's the story. I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Lucien. So thank you so much for our presentation. Thanks, Maciek, as well. We have two great questions in the Q&A. The first one is the following. In B2B, you have a lot less touch points and advertisement budgets. Can you still apply marketing mix modeling to optimize marketing spend?
Absolutely. So, there are so many touch points that you are not maybe aware of. In B2B, we see that there's so much more data than you typically think you have. And of course, your marketing spend is one thing, but you also have other things that you do. So it's not only like the media marketing that you do, but you have sales, for example, sales teams reaching out to clients, the activity of sales teams. You've got website visits, you've got mentions in the press, you got seminars and webinars, you got not with COVID, but you got conferences, you got things for automotive, for example, the big auto shows. So there's so many things that are driving your business, and it typically, we say marketing mix, and most people then think media mix, but marketing mix involves all marketing P's, as I traditionally call it. So it's the place, promotion, product, your innovations, all of these things, plus your external factors like competition, economy, global developments, the prices of labor, the prices of raw materials. All of these things are actually driving your business. And some of them you can control and others you cannot control. So the same technique, marketing mix modeling, we use for B2B businesses as well. Although it is slightly different, I must admit, than if you are a B2C business.
Okay. Another question was, how long does a marketing modeling project take to show effects?
Yeah, it's a good one. So typically, we use 2 to 3 years of data as a minimum. If you don't have 3 years, 2 or 3 years of data, the project doesn't take any time because we don't do it. We can get some indications, but most companies do have 2 to 3 years of data, and then within, let's say, 2 to 3 months, we will have the first effects and the first insights based usually on the real business questions. So we do start working backwards. Like Mark Ritson said, start with interviewing the stakeholders. What are you looking for? What do you already know? What are your hypotheses? Then work backwards. What data do we need to collect for that? How do we visualize it? How do we do the what if use cases? So if this, then that type of use cases.
Yeah.
2 to 3 months.
Okay.
And typically we repeat it then every 3 months and every 6 months, depending on the business frequency.
Okay. I have also a question around GDPR. How does GDPR limit customer tracking?
Is that question for Maciek or for me?
I don't know. Who feels comfortable to talk about GDPR?
Well, if I look at I can look at 2 areas. So if you look at the marketing mix, GDPR usually doesn't play any role because you don't use the individual customer data. But if you go into one-to-one marketing, there, of course, you have your limitations. And I think most people that know GDPR know that you need to have an opt-in from your customers if you want to reach them one-on-one. So this is actually where I see the big difference. One-on-one, you need to be really GDPR compliant. Marketing mix, typically no personalized data at all. So easy answer, hopefully.
I think a straightforward answer.
Yes.
So, and I'm looking if I have any other questions. Yeah, maybe a last one. So you do this media mix modeling and so on. So we talk about a lot of data, but how do you know whether the results you are getting are good or bad?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that's also one question that you need to answer up front to gain trust, that people use the let's say the approach that you have. So I know from experience that the modelers that we have, the technical people, they have like 10, 15 validation methods to check data. So one of the things that they do is, for example, they look how accurate the model predicts the future, but then of course the future has already happened. So for example, you let the model predict 2021 first half of the year, but you already have that data and you don't give that data to the model, and then you just compare what the model says and what really happened. So that's the best way of testing. If that's accurate, and you can do that in many different ways, then you have already some reliability. But the other thing that is also very important and that I always apply is the more qualitative approach, where I ask the business people what their hypotheses are and what they expect. And typically these models point in these directions as well. So if you get totally opposite insights from your marketing mix modeling, then you need to dive deeper. It could be that the business really doesn't understand what's happening, or they have no experience. It could also be that there is some errors in the data. But usually the errors in the data we already capture with the technical validation. But to get the people on board, it's the business validation as well.
Okay.
So as an example, this client, it's a good question, and it's if you have time for a little story. When we presented the first results to this client, to the C-level, to the CEO and the vice CEO and the CMO, we said, you have a big problem. Your base sales is declining year on year, and you're doing a lot on advertising. You have COVID, that's all a tailwind, but your base sales is declining. What is base sales? And they had no idea. So that's the sales that happens if you do nothing. That's sales that happens automatically. Can be true, and I don't grasp that concept. 2 months later, they came back to us and they said, "Hey guys, our base sales is declining. What's driving it?" Because they also saw it in different other, like the ad hoc research they do with GfK. They saw it in some other, let's say, business results, and there was big panic in the organization. So that happens. It's all part of. There's always multiple angles to have a look at. It's not just one magic tool that shows you everything, but it's typically it's the organizational adoption, like Maciek also presented, and the same that Mark Ritson said. That's where it starts. So and then all the rest follows.
Yeah. Well, Thank you very much, Lucien. I think this session, the last hour, we have seen the importance of bringing all things together. So the people, the process, the technology, and really keep looking at the data and look at the ways to improve the business and the customer experience. So I want to thank everyone for attending the webinar today. Thank you again, Lucien and Maciek. Thanks to Engagement Factory team. And I wish everyone a fantastic day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.